afternoon. At the tone, Pacific Daylight Time will be 5, 4, and 30 seconds.
What? Oh my God, we're having an earthquake. Wait a minute. Hold on. Can you feel that? Yes, I sure can. Okay, this is interesting. There go the lights. Oh.
We are here with Becky Fitzgerald. It is the 1st of October, 2019 at the Scotts Valley Library, and we are here to talk about the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Can you start by telling me how long you've lived in Santa Cruz?
I was born in Santa Cruz, and I just turned 60, so that gives you your answer.
Have you ever lived anywhere else?
Brief periods of time. Went to college in San Diego, went to college up in Sonoma County, but kept coming home.
Always in California?
Oh yeah.
So you've experienced a couple of earthquakes?
Oh yeah.
Would you give us your earthquake story?
Well, on the day that the 1989 earthquake hit, I was actually in downtown Santa Cruz until shortly before the earthquake happened. And I had gone up to Felton because I was my great-grandmother's in-home supportive service person. And I wasn't there more than a few minutes when everything started to shake. And of course, I'm thinking, get under a table, get in the doorway. How am I going to get this 101-year-old woman out of her wheelchair and under a table or in the doorway? So basically, I leaned over and held her in her wheelchair. And things fell out of the cupboards and crashed all around us. And later, when I'm trying to clean up afterward, and she said that she thought I had held the refrigerator door shut with my butt, which was such a sweet thing to say. Thank you, Nana. And we started calling people because that's what people do after an earthquake.
Sure.
And I found that my husband had rode the earthquake out in our house, which sustained enough damage that we got yellow tagged, and he thought the house was going to collapse under him while he was in it. And until we were able to get the house fixed, anytime anyone drove by the house, the whole house shook. And we were on the corner of a mountain road, which means that the road went all the way around our house. So the whole time, you could just feel the house going as people drove by. Oh, wow. And my husband went running up the road to try and help people out. And there was a lot of worry and concern. And of course, the aftershocks kept coming, and that didn't help. My brother-in-law was outside with his youngest child, who was about 2.5 at the time, I think. And the chimney came down near them, which was, but nobody got hurt, so that was good. One of the people who died was somebody I knew. There was a young man whose family owned a restaurant in Aptos. Good Golly Miss Lolly was the name of the restaurant. And he had been going home after the worst of the quake, and he was on the freeway, and horses had gotten out of some field somewhere and ended up going up the off-ramp, I guess, and he ended up crashing his car. So that, basically his death was a result of what had happened because of the earthquake. And I was lucky. All of my family was safe. We ended up, lots of us had to get small business administration loans to fix our houses up because they weren't safe anymore. But no one died, in our family at least. And a number of weeks after the quake, my mother and my husband and I went hiking through Nicene Marks because that's where the epicenter was. And we got as close to the epicenter as was humanly possible without risking going across the worst slide, because we got way far into the park and lots of the path was wiped out, and we made our own path. But then we got to this hillside and the whole thing was caved in. And it was like, we're not even gonna try crossing that sucker. So that's basically, and I have pictures, so if you want to see those, I can show you those.
Yeah. So you said that your first reaction after the major part of the earthquake was to call people.
Mm-hmm.
You had phone service then?
Yes, but it didn't necessarily mean that the person I was trying to call, this was, before cell phones. Mm-hmm. So you had landlines. And, I tell you, they're much better after a disaster, because right now if we have the power goes out, then that cell phone tower up in the ridge goes out, and there's no way of calling anyone. There's no power. A lot of times we got busy signals. Sometimes we got, the volume of calls is too high. Please try to make your call again later. At that particular time, I had 4 generations of my family living in Santa Cruz County. So it was quite anxiety-provoking trying to reach everyone and to see. And I had other family members who lived up in Oakland and San Francisco area. And I know that my great uncle lived through the earthquake because he'd gone home to see the game, the World Series game. So that was, it was very unnerving not being able to get a hold of people.
Right. Did you know the significance of the quake when it happened?
I knew it was big. I'd been through several earthquakes before. I remember one when I was pretty young, about 4 or 5, and I was living in the Live Oak area, and there was a field by our house that had been plowed. And I remember watching the furrows go up and down. I mean, it wasn't a horrible quake, but it was enough that I could see that. And I had not experienced one as big as this one was.
What did you do for information at the time? Did you listen to a radio? Did you get news from neighbors? Were you even worried about news at that point?
Definitely worried about news because, everybody's always talking about the big one. Well, if that's not the big one, there's another bigger one coming. There was a lot of rumors going around. You could get some stuff in the radio. If you had power, you could watch TV, but not everybody had power. A lot of times you would be in your car because then you could hear the radio. But a lot of it was rumor, newspapers. I remember going down to the downtown branch and just seeing books everywhere.
Did you work at the library?
Yes, I worked at the library back then too. I started working at this library when I was 16.
Okay.
So I've been here a while.
Yeah. So how soon after the quake did you venture downtown?
Within a day or two. My brother-in-law was working for the city. So, of course, he worked for the Parks Division. So he immediately was downtown, helping clean up and what have you. And so we got a lot of news from him, at least about what was going on in our area. I think that was the time, I'm hoping I'm not mixing my presidents and vice presidents up. I think that was the time that, I had to go back and check, that Dan Quayle had made some comment about he had seen a lot of tornadoes, and this was worse. It wasn't a tornado. It was something like that. It's been a few years. I don't remember every detail.
Sure. It's been a couple of years, yeah. Someone else in another interview mentioned that George H.W. Bush came and toured.
Maybe it was Bush and not Quayle.
Yeah. Did the earthquake impact your life, and if so, how?
Well, it was a very direct impact because traffic wasn't normal because, you know, some of the roads were damaged in some of the areas. A lot of people didn't have power. Having to get an SBA loan and jumping through all the hoops about that, and whether they were going to let us stay in our house until it was repaired, because it wasn't red tagged, but it wasn't safe. Cleanup was a big thing.
How soon until you went back to work?
That I'm not too sure about. I'm sure it was within a reasonable amount of time. I don't know that I was actually working at the library because it was in '89. I was getting my master's. I wasn't working a lot. And I was working at Cabrillo. Okay. One of the ways that my life was very much impacted had to do with getting over the hill to school, because I was getting my degree in library science.
Where?
At San Jose State. And most people weren't allowed to just drive over the hill anymore because, you know, and so I was taking the Greyhound because that was the route over the hill. If you wanted to take the bus, that's what you took. And then there was a lot of battling going on about eminent domain and who was allowed to have the route over the hill, because the Santa Cruz Metro started running buses over the hill too. I should probably clarify the thing about working at the library. I worked for 5.5 years for the library, and then I went to school in San Diego and up in Sonoma and a few other places, and then we came back to town and I started working for the library again. So it wasn't straight from when I was 16 on.
Sure, some breakup in there.
So there was, it also impacted what I was able to study, because since I had to depend on the bus, and to get the last bus back over the hill, and I think we were living in Lompico at the time, and so you could really see a lot of the impacts there.
Yeah.
I ended up taking 3 different classes in cataloging, which is not my favorite thing. I'm a reference librarian. But I could take those and be able to get the last bus back home, just how the schedule worked out.
Yeah.
And it was really actually rather scary, because the bus stop that you took at that time was somewhat of a distance from the school, and it was dark, you know, it was late.
Yeah.
And it wasn't in the best part of town.
Sure. Do you think the earthquake impacted the Santa Cruz community?
Definitely. In several different ways. I mean, people tried to help each other out. And I know that I ended up collecting all these newspaper articles for a long time. I don't know if I still have them now, but I did back then. I had them for years. And I remember one article was about people in Watsonville, that a lot of them were so frightened to go back into their houses that they camped outside. And all the talk about earthquake weather. That was the fun thing, you know, well, this is earthquake weather. And I know that every October I wonder, if we have another big earthquake, like an earthquake's going to come specifically in October, not any other time of the year.
Right.
We all know they come whenever they come. But yeah, there was a lot of helping each other out.
From what I understand, Lompico is a lot like that anyways. Is very, like a very tight-knit, supportive community, sort of insular. Do you have any anecdotes about people being helpful in their community or supportive, or?
Well, like I said, my husband went running up the road to see who he could help out, and we lived on the corner of Lake and Carroll, and he went running up Carroll, and we weren't that far from the top of Carroll. He went running up Lake. We weren't that far from where Lake runs into one of the crossroads. I can't remember which one it was. It's where the pond is. If you know anything about Lompico, you know where the pond is. And there was an A-frame house up there, and part of the A-frame had collapsed, and it landed on the washer and/or washer and dryer outside on the decks. The whole thing didn't cave in. Michael's, that's my husband, he said the person who was living there was pretty upset. Gee, I wonder why. And like I said, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law lost their chimney. I think they may have had part of their back porch come down. That one I'd have to check on too. When you live in the woods, things come down, and so sometimes it's an earthquake, sometimes it's a tree, sometimes it's torrential rains. So the back deck part might have been a tree falling, but the earthquake did take down their chimney. We had part of our foundation kind of, I wouldn't say crumble, but get damaged in the corner, the outside corner of our house had moved apart at the bottom. It wasn't like this. It was only about half an inch to an inch. But you don't usually look at your house splitting outside, It's like, ooh, gee.
Yeah, unsettling.
Very much so. People were just trying to look out for each other. One thing that was really, this doesn't have to do with Lompico, but definitely was something that happened after the earthquake. There was a small store near Emmeline that started gouging, and the papers were all over that, because I remember coming from Lompico into Scotts Valley, and the CVS, which was a Long's back then, they had all these supplies outside, batteries and all this kind of stuff. And I don't remember, they may have even been giving them away, but it was all out there, it was available, and I remember walking into Nob Hill and going, oh my God, because everything was everywhere on the floor. It definitely made the normal things of life, like grocery shopping, just a tad difficult.
Right.
But yeah, the Emmeline store just started gouging prices, which was, a lot of other people were not doing that. So it was that much more appalling.
Sort of a standout among other stores.
Yeah.
Unsportsmanlike conduct.
Yeah, basically.
Do you take any precautions against natural disasters after your experience?
Well, I confess I do not have an emergency kit set up. I have in the past, but your needs change, and so I know I'm in some ways a little bit, for want of a better word, screwed if the bridge goes out, because we live on a dead-end road. Now, I can hike down the road and then onto, there's a right-of-way for the water company or something, and I can hike up through, and and then illegally climb over the fence into, it backs up to the big meadow, when you go into Felton and there's that big meadow behind the Felton Fair. So I could probably trek out, provided my arthritis isn't too horrible. But because I live in the mountains and have now for quite a while, I'm not as worried about certain things because I experience, we get these horrible rainstorms, we get power outages. I have a wood stove. I can heat my house if I have to that way. I can probably even cook on top of it if I absolutely necessarily need to. We've always made sure to have a gas stove as opposed to an electric stove because so far, knock on wood, the gas has always worked even after some of these disasters. So, might have to light it with a match instead of the electronic igniters, but we can cook. And at this point in time, I've got, there's 3 households on our property. So I've, my husband and I are in one, and my daughter and son-in-law and granddaughter in one, and my brother-in-law and sister-in-law are in another. So we've got family on site. And the property that we have is, amazingly enough, Ben Lomond, relatively flat. So if we were to have another really bad earthquake, I might have to worry about a tree. But not so much some other things that if I was on rocky hillside or, and I'm in the bend of the river, but I'm not so close to the river that I really have to worry about devastating landslides. My neighbors might have to, which would be really sad for them, and I would, run over and help if I could. But so I periodically, kind of look, okay, do I have a stockpile of this or stockpile of that? Do I have stuff in case, but.
So you may not have an earthquake kit or an emergency bag, but you have a mental awareness.
Yeah, and I do have like a first aid kit, and I take blood pressure pills, and I'm on one of those plans where you get 3 months at one time, so I'm not worried that, I'm going to run out. And I don't have a medication that got imminent danger of croaking if I don't take it. So.
What is it like to reflect on your experience 30 years later?
It wasn't fun. But that being part of a group that had experienced the same thing, and telling my story and listening to theirs, and that part's fun. Surviving was real good. not being one of the. Luckily, there weren't too many deaths in this county. I'm not a super diehard baseball fan, but thank God for the World Series going on right then, because there would have been a lot more deaths. So. I think that after any big disaster, if you're somebody who's gone through it and you weren't badly injured, you may have had some big inconveniences. But if you didn't get hurt, or people you knew other than that one young man I knew, then it's kind of like we're in this together, and we can work and help each other, and we can rebuild, and we're going to come back from this. And that was a good thing.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
I have some pictures if you'd like to see them.
Absolutely.
Okay, this first page here, I believe this piece of cliff that came down was where the old crepe place was. Because Crepe Place used to be located near downtown Santa Cruz. And it moved after that. So these are pictures of Santa Cruz and Aptos. This picture here shows where the town clock stopped, and you can see bricks falling out of this building here, and this is one of the big cracks that was in the ground. This is near Aptos. That was closer to the Epicenter, so that's why some of the buildings look so thrashed. And we've got a bunch of trees did come down. Some of these pictures are downtown Santa Cruz too. It looks very different now. And this is near, I believe this is near where the Epicenter was, because I think that was the slide we weren't going to cross. Now, I'd forgotten about how many Victorian type houses were in Santa Cruz that actually aren't there anymore. And again, these are more in Santa Cruz, and this is what my house looked like. Things fell out of it.
So you talk about having worked downtown and having gone downtown a couple days afterward. A lot of people mention the Cooper House during these interviews.
Yes.
Do you want to say something about the Cooper House?
I think that the Cooper House was taken down a little too fast. I think it was an opportunity for clear it all out and make it new and make it more modern. And the Cooper House was actually a really cool building. Yeah, that's not so great anymore. I have a really old postcard from early days of the Cooper House. And I remember when I was in high school, which was a lot long after early days of the Cooper House, by the way. I know I'm ancient decrepit, but I'm not that ancient decrepit. There would be people out there all the time, be music, and there was this, has anybody talked to you about Ginger Johnson?
No.
She'd be out there dancing. She had red hair. No matter how old that woman got, her hair was red, and it was naturally that way. Her father's had been like that. So she would be out there and she'd dance, and there was a band called Warmth, I think, and they'd play, and it was just a very lively, warm place to be. And the little boutique shops in there were very cool, and I would like to go in there and wander around and look at things. And there was a lot of, there were things like that happened that, I just remembered something. So down on Pacific Garden Mall, there was an eye doctor, Dr. Zwerling. Dr. Zwerling was a kick. He would, he always wore like a 3-piece suit to work.
Wow.
And they'd all, for instance, be all the same shade of brown, but they would have different patterns. And then he would, he'd have some pretty ugly, sort of beigey brown colored, vest and jacket and pants. And then he'd have this flaming bright green and orange tie that would just basically burn your eyeballs. And he was up near where the bookstore had been. He was near the cobblestone courtyard, which I don't know if you know about that either. And his eye doctor place was badly damaged, and there was a period of time where store owners, they had this very brief amount of time that they were allowed to go in and try to rescue stuff. And some of the stores, they had like like a bucket line almost. Somebody would go in and somebody else would follow, and they'd hand things out, like passing the bucket down a bucket line to put out a fire. And he did rescue some of his, contacts and glasses and stuff. And he had to set up his optometry practice in a studio in his backyard of his house. So if you wanted to get your eyes dealt with, you'd have to go to Dr. Bernard Sperling's house then instead of down on the mall. I remember one of the ways that, totally forgot about these things, one of the ways that life was impacted for people was because so many buildings were damaged and they'd have to take up residence somewhere else. And the Holy Cross Church had a tent put out in the parking lot. And so you'd have to go into the parking lot for the services. And I remember when it was Book Tent Santa Cruz as opposed to bookshop. And I don't remember, there was Kelly's French Bakery and the bookstore and a couple of other things around this cobblestone courtyard. And of course, they all had to move. The place I left from when I was downtown that day was Logos Bookstore. I missed being downtown by about 20 minutes, maybe 30, but no more than that.
You would have had a very different story.
Yeah, and who knows how my great-grandmother would have done. I mean, she was 101. She had just had her 101st birthday the previous week. And she lived to be 102, so... Yeah, there was a lot of politicking going on, too. I mean, the people got together and helped each other, but there was a lot of politicking as well. No, I'm not crying. I've got a blocked tear duct. So yeah, the Cooper House, that seemed a little quick. Because a lot of the other buildings, even if portions were destroyed, they'd try to keep up at least the facades. So, I mean, because these were old buildings, and it's not to say you should never change anything, but you gotta keep some of the old too.
Yeah.
The Teacup Chinese restaurant, that was on the mall, and you had to go way the heck up these stairs to get to it. And it's where I think it's where the Jamba Juice is. It's toward the end of the mall. And they had to stop. There were a lot of changes to the appearance of the Pacific Garden Mall after. I mean, obviously because things fell, there was changes, but the kind of architecture that came after, and sometimes it looked pretty good, and sometimes it was like, what is wrong with you? Why did you put that there?
Well, if there's not anything else that you'd like to add, I appreciate you coming here and sharing your story with us.
Thank you.